Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Steel. Marcus Gaines stood in his corner office on the 40th floor, watching the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 42, he had built Apex Construction from a one-man operation into a multi-million-dollar empire. His calloused hands, still bearing the scars from his early days swinging hammers, now signed contracts worth millions. But success had come at a price. Long hours, missed dinners, and a growing distance from his family. His son Alex, now 16, had inherited Marcus's determination but directed it toward extreme sports rather than business. The kid was fearless on a skateboard, BMX bike, or rock climbing wall. It worried Kayla, his wife of 18 years, but Marcus admired the boy's courage. At least someone in the family still took risks. Kayla Douglas Gaines had been the homecoming queen at their high school, and at 39, she still turned heads. They'd married young, built a life together in their sprawling Bellevue home. But lately, Marcus noticed the way she looked at her phone, the hushed conversations that ended when he entered rooms, the sudden interest in yoga classes that ran late into the evening. "Mr. Gaines?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your wife called. She wanted to remind you about Alex's tournament in Cabo this weekend." Marcus nodded, though she couldn't see him. The extreme sports tournament had been Alex's dream for months. Top young athletes from across North America would compete in multiple disciplines. Kayla had insisted on making it a family vacation, bringing her mother Muriel Douglas along for support. Muriel had never liked Marcus. The feeling was mutual. A bitter woman in her 60s who'd spent her life criticizing every man her daughter dated. She made it clear she thought Kayla had settled when she married a common laborer. Even now, with Marcus's net worth in the tens of millions, Muriel found ways to diminish his achievements. The tournament weekend arrived with unseasonable heat in Cabo San Lucas. Marcus watched Alex dominate the BMX competition, his son's natural athleticism and fearless approach leaving competitors half his age in the dust. For a moment, the family fell whole again, Kayla cheering beside him, even Muriel managing to look proud. But Marcus's attention was divided. Between events, he noticed Kayla constantly texting someone, her face lighting up in ways he hadn't seen directed at him in years. When he asked about it, she claimed it was just coordinating with other parents. The accident happened during the final skateboarding event. Alex was attempting a complex trick he'd been perfecting for months when the board caught an edge. Marcus watched in horror as his son tumbled 15 feet, landing hard on the concrete below. The sound of impact would haunt him forever. At the local hospital, a harried doctor explained in broken English that Alex had suffered severe internal bleeding and needed immediate surgery. The facility was understaffed, undersupplied, and demanded payment up front. $50,000 for the surgery, more for the extended care Alex would need. Marcus reached for his wallet, but Kayla's hand stopped him. "Marcus, this is ridiculous," she said, her voice cold. "We're not paying for this third-world medical care. We need to get him airlifted to a real hospital. He could die waiting for transport," Marcus replied, pulling out his black card. But the machine was down, and the hospital's internet connection was sporadic at best. International transfers would take hours they didn't have. That's when Muriel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's karma," she said, loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear. The boy's been asking for this with all his dangerous stunts. Marcus stared at his mother-in-law, unable to process what he'd heard. Kayla nodded in agreement. "Maybe this will teach him some sense. I hope he thinks about this in that rotten hospital." She turned to Marcus with disgust. "And maybe you'll finally learn to be a real father instead of just writing checks." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His son was dying, and his wife, the woman he built an empire for, was talking about karma and life lessons. "We're leaving," Kayla announced. "I'm not spending another minute in this place. If Alex survives, maybe he'll be grateful we didn't enable his recklessness anymore." Marcus looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The same face he'd kissed goodbye that morning, but the eyes were those of someone he'd never met. Someone who could abandon a child, their child, to prove a point. "You go," Marcus said quietly. "I'm staying with my son." Kayla shrugged. Suit yourself. We'll be at the resort if you come to your senses. As they walked away, Marcus heard Muriel mutter, maybe now he'll see what his precious boy gets him. Should have focused on giving Kayla what she really needs instead of spoiling that brat. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't plead. He watched his wife and mother-in-law disappear through the hospital doors, then turned back to the doctors and started making calls. Chapter 2. The Awakening. By dawn, Marcus had moved mountains. His assistant in Seattle had wired $100,000 to the hospital within 3 hours. A medical helicopter was en route from San Diego with a trauma team. Most importantly, Alex was stable and would recover fully, though it would take months. But as Marcus sat beside his son's hospital bed, something fundamental had shifted inside him. The man who had built an empire through determination and strategic thinking was now applying those same skills to a different kind of construction project, understanding exactly who his wife had become. He started with the resort. A simple call to the front desk revealed that Mrs. Gaines had requested a room change from the family suite to a smaller room, but one that happened to be next to a reservation under the name Ed Jackson. Marcus knew that name. Ed Jackson was Kayla's yoga instructor, a man 10 years younger with the kind of lean, artistic build that made middle-aged women forget their responsibilities. The pieces clicked into place with surgical precision. The late yoga classes, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in finding herself that had started 6 months ago, the way she'd grown cold toward Alex, viewing his adventurous spirit as an inconvenience rather than something to nurture. Marcus made more calls. A private investigator he'd used for background checks on business partners. A contact at the cell phone company who owed him favors. By the time Alex woke up, groggy from anesthesia, but alive, Marcus had a complete picture of his wife's double life. Dad, Alex's voice was weak but determined. Did we win? Marcus squeezed his son's hand. We're going to win everything that matters, Alex. I promise you that. The evidence arrived via encrypted email while Alex slept. Photos of Kayla and Ed at restaurants Marcus had never heard of. Hotel receipts dating back 8 months. Text messages that made Marcus's stomach turn, not just because of the affair, but because of what they revealed about Kayla's true feelings toward Alex. The kid's accident might be a blessing, she'd texted Ed just hours after leaving the hospital. Marcus will finally see what I've been dealing with. Maybe now he'll prioritize our future instead of enabling Alex's death wish. Ed's response was even worse. When are you going to tell Marcus the truth about Alex? The kid's not even his biggest problem anymore. Marcus read that message 3 times before its meaning sank in. He made another call to his investigator. I need a DNA test, he said simply, and I need you to dig deeper into Ed Jackson. Everything. I don't care what it costs. The truth came back within 48 hours. Alex was Marcus's biological son. That much was certain. But Ed Jackson's history revealed something far more sinister. 2 previous relationships with married women, both ending when their husbands discovered not just affairs, but elaborate schemes to manipulate the women into isolating themselves from their families and draining their finances. Kayla hadn't just strayed. She'd been systematically groomed by a professional predator who specialized in wealthy, lonely wives. The yoga studio Ed worked was a front. His real income came from a series of small cons and emotional manipulation schemes that flew just under the radar of law enforcement. But the most devastating revelation came from Kayla's own phone records. She'd been in contact with Ed during Alex's accident, lived texting him updates, and laughing about Marcus's pathetic attempts to save their son. She'd even sent photos of Alex unconscious in the hospital bed, with captions mocking Marcus's savior complex. Marcus set down the phone and looked at his sleeping son. Alex's face was still swollen from the accident, but he looked peaceful, innocent, unaware that his own mother had weaponized his near-death experience as entertainment for her lover. That's when Marcus Gaines, the man who'd built his fortune by turning problems into opportunities, made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't just divorce Kayla. He wouldn't just expose her affair. He would systematically dismantle the life she'd built while betraying him, and he would make sure that both she and Ed Jackson understood the true cost of underestimating him. The old Marcus might have confronted them directly, might have tried to work things out for the sake of their marriage. But that Marcus had died in a Mexican hospital while watching his wife abandon their dying son. The new Marcus was something else entirely. Chapter 3: The Architect of Ruin. Marcus spent the next week in Mexico, never leaving Alex's side as his son recovered. To the outside world, he appeared to be a devoted father nursing his child back to health. In reality, he was laying the groundwork for the most complex project he'd ever undertaken. From his laptop in Alex's hospital room, Marcus began orchestrating a symphony of destruction that would touch every aspect of Kayla and Ed's lives. But unlike the crude revenge fantasies that had initially flashed through his mind, this would be surgical, methodical, and completely devastating. First, he established the rules of engagement. Kayla had returned to Seattle after 3 days in Cabo, telling their friends and neighbors that Marcus was overreacting to Alex's accident and that she couldn't watch him coddle their son anymore. She'd moved Ed into their home while Marcus was gone, a level of disrespect that confirmed everything Marcus needed to know about her character. Through carefully placed phone calls, Marcus began feeding information to specific people, not about the affair. That would come later. Instead, he focused on building a narrative about Kayla's judgment and maternal instincts. Dr. Patricia Ward, Alex's pediatrician since birth, received a call from a concerned friend who'd witnessed Kayla's behavior at the hospital in Mexico. The story spread through their social circle like wildfire, not as gossip, but as genuine concern for a boy whose mother had seemingly abandoned him in his moment of greatest need. Marcus's business partner, Guillermo Owens, began hearing whispers at the country club about Kayla's new yoga instructor, who'd moved into the Gaines' home while Marcus was caring for his injured son. The implications were left unstated but clear. Meanwhile, Marcus was gathering intelligence on Ed Jackson's operation. The yoga studio was owned by a shell company that Ed controlled through a maze of fake business licenses. His previous victims had been too embarrassed to press charges, but Marcus found them through property records and court filings. 3 women, all divorced, all financially ruined. The pattern was always the same. Ed would identify lonely, wealthy wives through the yoga studio. He'd gradually isolate them from friends and family while positioning himself as their emotional savior. Once he'd gained their trust completely, he'd manipulate them into increasingly poor financial decisions, always with the promise that they'd start a new life together once they were free from their toxic marriages. But Ed never stayed. Once the money was gone and the divorce was final, he'd disappear, leaving behind only debt and emotional devastation. Marcus realized that Kayla wasn't Ed's partner. She was his mark. And her cruelty toward Alex wasn't just callousness. It was evidence of how thoroughly Ed had poisoned her thinking. Every maternal instinct had been reframed as enabling. Every moment of care for Alex was now seen as betraying her true self. This knowledge should have generated sympathy for Kayla, but Marcus felt only cold satisfaction. She'd made her choice in that Mexican hospital. Everything that followed was simply consequence. Alex was cleared for travel on a Friday. As they boarded the medical transport plane to Seattle, Alex squeezed his father's hand. "Dad, I heard some what Mom said at the hospital," he admitted quietly. "I know she doesn't want me around anymore." Marcus looked at his son, bruised, vulnerable, but still possessing the courage that had made him a champion. "Alex, I want you to understand something. There are people in this world who will try to make you believe that your strength is weakness, that your courage is recklessness, that the things that make you special are actually flaws." Alex nodded, hanging on every word. Those people are revealing something about themselves, not about you. And when someone shows you who they really are, you believe them the first time. Your mother showed us who she is. Now we respond accordingly. The plane lifted off from Cabo, carrying them back to Seattle in a war that Kayla and Ed Jackson didn't even know had begun. Marcus spent the flight making final preparations. By the time they landed, every piece would be in place. Kayla thought she was getting away with her betrayal because Marcus seemed focused only on Alex's recovery. She had no idea that her husband had spent the week becoming something far more dangerous than an angry spouse. He'd become a strategist with unlimited resources and absolutely nothing left to lose. Chapter 4. The Trap Springs. Marcus returned to Seattle with Alex to find their Bellevue home transformed into something unrecognizable. Ed Jackson's motorcycles dominated the three-car garage. Yoga equipment filled the living room where Alex's gaming setup used to be. Most insulting of all, Ed had moved into the master bedroom, into Marcus's bed, as if the house already belonged to him. Kayla greeted them at the door with a performance worthy of an Oscar. She fussed over Alex with exaggerated concern, telling neighbors who'd gathered to welcome them home how traumatic the whole experience had been for her. She painted herself as the victim of Marcus's obsessive behavior in Mexico, suggesting that his refusal to leave Alex's side had been somehow unhealthy. Marcus just couldn't accept that accidents happen, she told their neighbor, Christine Burns, while Marcus carried Alex's bags inside. He made everything so much more dramatic than it needed to be. But Marcus noticed what Kayla missed. The way Christine smiled didn't reach her eyes, the awkward silence that followed Kayla's explanation. Word of her behavior in Mexico had already spread through their tight-knit community, just as Marcus had orchestrated. Ed Jackson emerged from the kitchen with the casual confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. At 32, he was undeniably handsome in a way that appealed to women seeking excitement in their settled lives. He extended his hand to Marcus with a smirk. "Marcus, right? I'm Ed. Kayla's told me so much about you." Marcus shook the man's hand, noting the deliberate firmness of Ed's grip, a challenge disguised as courtesy. "All good things, I hope." "Of course," Ed replied, but his eyes said otherwise. That evening, Marcus watched from his home office as Kayla and Ed performed their domestic routine. They cooked dinner together, laughing at private jokes while Alex sat alone at the kitchen island, still recovering from his injuries. When Alex asked if they could watch a movie together as a family, Kayla sighed dramatically. "Alex, you're 16. Don't you think you're a little old to be clinging to family movie nights?" The hurt on Alex's face was instantaneous, but he tried to hide it with a shrug. "Yeah, I guess." Marcus made a mental note. Every cruelty would be remembered. Every slight would be repaid with interest. Over the next week, Marcus played the role of the defeated husband perfectly. He threw himself back into work with apparent desperation, staying late at the office while Kayla and Ed grew bolder in their disrespect. They made no effort to hide their relationship anymore, treating the house as if it belonged to them. But Marcus's late nights weren't about work. They were about war. Through his private investigator, he'd identified Ed's previous victims. Roberta Flowers had lost her home and custody of her children after Ed manipulated her into a disastrous divorce. Susie Greenwood had declared bankruptcy 6 months after her husband left her. Paula Huff had suffered a complete mental breakdown and was still in therapy. Marcus reached out to each of them personally, not as an angry husband seeking revenge, but as someone who understood exactly what they'd experienced. His approach was gentle, empathetic, and utterly convincing. "I know what he did to you," Marcus told Roberta during a carefully arranged chance meeting at a Seattle coffee shop. "And I know how helpless you felt when no one believed you." Roberta's eyes filled with tears. "He made me think my husband was the problem, that my children would be better off without me. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd lost everything. Would you be willing to help make sure he never does this to another family?" The question hung in the air between them. Roberta studied Marcus's face, seeing something that convinced her this wasn't just about revenge. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Ed Jackson's operation depended on staying below law enforcement's radar by never quite crossing the line into prosecutable fraud. But Marcus didn't need Ed to break the law. He needed Ed to reveal his true nature in a way that would destroy his credibility forever. The trap came together over the course of 2 weeks. Roberta, Susie, and Paula agreed to participate in what Marcus called the performance. Each woman reached out to Ed through social media, pretending to be potential new clients at his yoga studio. They were wealthy, recently separated, and desperately seeking guidance. Ed, unable to resist such obvious marks, began grooming all three women simultaneously. But what he didn't know was that every conversation was being recorded, every meeting was being filmed, and every manipulation tactic was being documented by Marcus's team of investigators. Meanwhile, Marcus accelerated the timeline by making a strategic error of his own, one that Ed couldn't resist exploiting. He left his laptop open in the home office with what appeared to be confidential financial documents visible on the screen. The documents suggested that Marcus was preparing to transfer major assets offshore, possibly in preparation for divorce proceedings. Ed took the bait immediately, photographing the documents and sending them to Kayla with a message. We need to move faster. He's trying to hide money. What Ed didn't realize was that the documents were fabricated, and the laptop contained spyware that recorded everything he accessed. Marcus now had proof that Ed was actively scheming to defraud him, which elevated Ed's activities from seduction to criminal conspiracy. But the real masterpiece was still coming. Chapter 5. The Reckoning Unfolds. Marcus's counteroffensive began on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Kayla and Ed had grown so comfortable in their deception that they barely acknowledged Marcus's presence anymore. They spoke openly about their plans for redecorating the house, about the vacation they'd take once Kayla's divorce was finalized, about how much better their lives would be without Marcus's negative energy. Alex had returned to school, but came home each day to a house where he was treated like an unwelcome guest in his own home. Marcus watched his son's confidence crumble daily, saw the way Alex began questioning his own worth under the constant subtle criticism from Kayla and Ed's united front. That morning, as Marcus prepared to leave for work, he made his first open move. Kayla, we need to talk tonight about our future. She looked up from her yoga mat where Ed was adjusting her pose in a way that would have been obscene if performed by anyone else. Of course, Marcus. I think that conversation is long overdue. I agree completely, Marcus replied. 7 o'clock. Just the two of us. Ed started to object, but Marcus cut him off with a look that made the younger man step back instinctively. This is between my wife and me, Ed. I'm sure you understand. The day passed slowly as Marcus put the final pieces of his plan into motion. At exactly 7 o'clock, he sat across from Kayla in their dining room, the same room where they'd celebrated 18 wedding anniversaries, where they'd helped Alex with homework, where they'd planned their future together. I know about the affair, Marcus said without preamble. Kayla's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally, relief. Good, she said. I was getting tired of pretending. Ed and I are in love. Marcus, what we have is real, not some business arrangement like our marriage became. I see. And Alex will be fine. Teenagers are resilient. Maybe having a stepfather who actually pays attention to him will be good for him. Marcus nodded as if considering this. Tell me about Mexico. For the first time, Kayla looked uncomfortable. What about Mexico? Tell me about watching our son nearly die and deciding that it was karma. Tell me about hoping he would suffer in that rotten hospital. Tell me about texting Ed photos of Alex unconscious while I was trying to save his life. The color drained from Kayla's face. You don't understand. You weren't thinking clearly. You were going to bankrupt us for our son's life. Marcus's voice remained calm, but something in his tone made Kayla stop talking. You prioritized your boyfriend's comfort over our child's survival. That's not. You're twisting. I have the text messages, Kayla. All of them, including the ones where you and Ed laughed about my pathetic savior complex, including the photos you sent him of Alex in the hospital bed. Kayla's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. But that's not why I wanted to talk tonight, Marcus continued. I wanted to give you the opportunity to explain Ed's business model to me. You see, I've been doing some research into your boyfriend's background. Marcus slid a folder across the table. Kayla opened it to find photographs of Ed with his previous victims, financial records showing the pattern of destruction he'd left behind, and transcripts of Ed's recent conversations with Roberta, Susie, and Paula, conversations where he'd used identical manipulation tactics he'd used on Kayla. Ed isn't your boyfriend, Kayla. You're his mark. You're the fourth wealthy, lonely wife he's systematically isolated from her family, so he can access her assets. The difference is the other three women's husbands weren't worth destroying lives over. I am. Kayla's hands shook as she flipped through the evidence. This is fake. You're making this up because you can't accept that I found something real. Call him, Marcus said, sliding his phone across the table. Call Ed right now and ask him about Roberta Flowers. Ask him about the house in Portland he convinced her to buy for their future together, the house she lost when he disappeared with her divorce settlement. But before Kayla could reach for the phone, Ed himself walked into the dining room. He'd obviously been listening from the hallway. Impressive detective work, Marcus, Ed said with a confidence that no longer seemed quite as natural. But you're missing the big picture here. Am I? Kayla came to me, not the other way around. She was drowning in a marriage to a workaholic who cared more about building projects than building a relationship with his wife. I just showed her what real attention feels like. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in weeks. Ed, would you like to know what real attention feels like? Before Ed could respond, Marcus continued. Real attention is what I paid to your financial records over the past month. Real attention is what I paid to your conversations with my wife, which I've been recording since the day I got back from Mexico. Real attention is what I paid to building relationships with your previous victims, who are very excited to testify about your pattern of psychological manipulation and financial fraud. Ed's confidence cracked visibly. You can't prove anything. Everything between Kayla and me was consensual, including the part where you photographed my confidential financial documents and sent them to Kayla with plans to hide assets during our divorce proceedings. That's called conspiracy to commit fraud, Ed. It's a felony. The room fell silent except for the sound of Kayla's shaky breathing as she realized the full scope of what Marcus had orchestrated. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice never rising above conversational level. Ed, you're going to leave my house right now. You're going to pack your belongings, remove your motorcycles from my garage, and disappear from Seattle permanently. If I see you again, if you contact my wife again, if you so much as drive through this neighborhood again, I will have you arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Ed started to argue, but Marcus held up a hand. I'm not finished. The three women you victimized before Kayla, they're filing a civil lawsuit against you tomorrow morning. You'll be spending the next several years in court, defending against fraud charges and trying to pay damages you can't afford. Your yoga studio will be seized as part of the judgment. Your reputation will be destroyed, and your criminal activity will be a matter of public record forever. Ed's face had gone pale, but he still tried to maintain his composure. You can't destroy my whole life over this. Marcus stood up slowly, and for the first time, Ed saw something in Marcus's eyes that made him step backward. Ed, you made love to my wife in my bed while my son was fighting for his life in a foreign hospital. You turned my wife against my child. You tried to steal my life's work. I'm not destroying your life. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who you really are. The finality in Marcus's voice left no room for negotiation. Ed looked at Kayla one last time, perhaps hoping for support, but found only a woman staring at evidence of her own manipulation with growing horror. Within an hour, Ed Jackson was gone from their lives forever. But Marcus wasn't finished with Kayla. Chapter 6, The Truth Unveiled. With Ed's departure, the house fell into an eerie quiet that seemed to amplify every sound. Kayla sat at the dining room table, still clutching the folder of evidence, while Marcus methodically deleted every trace of Ed Jackson from their home security system, their Wi-Fi network, their lives. Marcus, Kayla said finally, her voice small and uncertain in a way he hadn't heard since they were teenagers. I think I made a mistake. Marcus paused in his work, looking at his wife with something that might have been pity. Which mistake would that be, Kayla? Ed, he wasn't who I thought he was. No, he wasn't. But the question isn't whether Ed deceived you. The question is why you were so willing to be deceived. Kayla's face crumpled. I was lonely, Marcus. You work all the time. You care more about your business than you do about me. I felt invisible in my own marriage. Marcus sat back down across from her, and for a moment, she might have seen a glimpse of the man she'd married, the one who'd built her a dream house, who'd worked 18-hour days to give her everything she'd ever wanted. Kayla, I built my company for you. For our family. Every contract I signed, every deal I made, every hour I worked was so you could have a life you dreamed of when we were kids. But I needed you, not just your money. You needed me. Marcus's voice was flat. Is that why you sent photos of our dying son to your boyfriend with captions mocking my attempts to save Alex's life? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of them could put out. I wasn't thinking clearly, Kayla whispered. Ed had been telling me that you were obsessed with Alex, that you used him to avoid dealing with problems in our marriage. When the accident happened, I thought maybe if you couldn't save him, you'd finally see that I needed saving too. Marcus stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. You wanted our son to die so you could get more attention from me. No, I never wanted him to die. I just wanted you to choose me for once instead of always choosing him. Kayla, Alex is our child. There was never supposed to be a choice between you and him. A mother doesn't compete with her own son for her husband's love. But even as he said it, Marcus realized that this competition had been building for years. Every time he'd attended one of Alex's sporting events, Kayla had found reasons to stay home. Every time Alex had accomplished something worth celebrating, Kayla had found ways to diminish it. He'd attributed it to normal parental differences, not recognizing it as something far more destructive. It helped me see that you'd made Alex more important than our marriage, Kayla continued, as if explaining this would make Marcus understand. He said that healthy families prioritize the marital relationship over the parent-child relationship. Ed said that because he was grooming you to abandon your maternal instincts, so you'd be easier to manipulate. Kayla, look at what he convinced you to do. You left your injured son in a foreign hospital. You brought your lover into our home while our child was recovering from trauma. You sent photos of Alex unconscious to entertain a man you'd known for 8 months. Each word landed like a physical blow, and Marcus watched his wife's face cycle through denial, rationalization, and finally, a horrible understanding of what she'd become. I can fix this, she said desperately. I'll apologize to Alex. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking their backyard, where Alex's BMX ramps still stood despite Kayla's suggestions that they were eyesores that should be removed. Kayla, do you remember our wedding vows? Of course. What did you promise me that day? To love, honor, and cherish you, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. And what did I promise you? Kayla's voice was barely audible. The same. I kept those vows for 18 years. When you were sick, I took care of you. When times were hard, I worked harder to make them better. When you needed anything, I provided it. But you abandoned those vows the moment keeping them became inconvenient. Marcus turned back to face her, and Kayla saw something in his expression that made her blood run cold. I didn't just lose a wife in Mexico, Kayla. I lost my faith in the woman I thought I'd married. And you didn't just betray me. You betrayed our son when he needed his mother most. But I can change. I can be better. You can't change what you revealed about yourself. When our child was dying, your first instinct wasn't to save him. It was to use his suffering as leverage in your affair. That's not a mistake, Kayla. That's a character defect so fundamental that no amount of therapy will fix it. Kayla began crying then, real tears that seemed to surprise her with their intensity. So, what happens now? You divorce me? You take Alex and leave me with nothing. Marcus looked at his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he'd loved for half his life, and felt nothing but emptiness where his affection used to be. What happens now is that you learn the difference between consequences and punishment. Ed was punishment. I actively destroyed his life because he tried to destroy mine. You, Kayla, will simply face the natural consequences of your choices. What does that mean? It means that tomorrow morning, I'm filing for divorce and full custody of Alex. It means that every friend, neighbor, and family member will know exactly what you did in Mexico and why. It means that for the rest of your life, people will look at you and remember that you abandoned your dying child for your boyfriend's attention. Kayla's sobs intensified. Marcus, please. People make mistakes. People can change. Some mistakes are too big to recover from. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. You show me who you really are, Kayla. Now you get to live with the consequences of that revelation. As if summoned by the conversation, Alex appeared in the doorway. He'd clearly been listening, and the look on his face suggested he'd heard everything he needed to hear. Mom. Alex's voice was steady despite the pain in his eyes. Did you really hope I would die in Mexico? Kayla looked at her son, her only child, the boy she'd carried for 9 months and raised for 16 years. And for one moment, Marcus thought she might find some thread of maternal instinct to pull herself back from the abyss. Instead, she said, Alex, you have to understand. Your father has always put you first, and that's not healthy for a marriage. I was trying to save our family. Alex nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed everything he'd suspected. Okay, Mom, I understand. But the understanding in Alex's voice wasn't forgiveness. It was finality. Marcus recognized it because he'd heard the same tone in his own voice when he'd accepted that his marriage was over. That night, as Kayla packed her belongings to move back to her mother's house, Marcus found Alex in his room, staring out the window at his BMX ramps. Dad, am I really more important to you than Mom was? Marcus sat on the edge of Alex's bed, choosing his words carefully. Alex, you and your mother were both equally important to me, but in different ways. A marriage is supposed to be a partnership where both parents work together to protect and nurture their children. What happened in Mexico wasn't about you being more important. It was about your mother forgetting that being a parent is the most important job either of us will ever have. Alex was quiet for a long moment. She really sent pictures of me to her boyfriend while I was unconscious? Yes. That's sick. Yes, it is. Another silence then. Dad, are you going to be okay? Marcus looked at his son, bruised but healing, hurt but still strong, betrayed by his own mother, but still capable of worrying about his father's well-being. Alex, we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be better than we've ever been. And for the first time since Mexico, Marcus meant every word. Chapter 7. The New Foundation. 6 months later, Marcus and Alex had developed a rhythm that felt more like a partnership than a traditional father-son relationship. Without Kayla's constant criticism and undermining, Alex had blossomed back into the confident, adventurous young man he'd been before the accident. His skills on the BMX bike had returned stronger than ever, and college scouts were already calling about scholarships. Marcus had restructured his work schedule, bringing Alex into the business side of Apex construction during summers and weekends. The boy had inherited his father's strategic mind and was showing genuine interest in architecture and project management. More importantly, they really talked, in ways they never had when Kayla's presence had dominated every family interaction. The divorce had been finalized with surgical precision. Kayla received exactly what Washington state law required and not a penny more. The prenuptial agreement Marcus had insisted on 18 years earlier, one of the few times he'd overruled Kayla's objections, protected the majority of his assets. She kept the car she'd been driving and half of their savings account. Everything else, including the house and full custody of Alex, went to Marcus. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was watching Kayla face the social consequences of her choices. Seattle's wealthy circles were small and tightly connected. Stories spread quickly, especially stories as dramatic as a woman abandoning her dying child for a boyfriend who turned out to be a con artist. Muriel Douglas had initially supported her daughter's relationship with Ed, even after learning about the affair. But when the full scope of Ed's deception became public, she turned on Kayla with characteristic viciousness. I raised you better than this, she told Kayla during one of their increasingly rare phone calls, unaware that Marcus could hear every word from his position in the kitchen. Bad enough you threw away a good marriage, but to be played for a fool by some pretty boy gigolo? You've embarrassed our entire family. Kayla now lived in a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a dermatology clinic to pay rent. Her yoga instructor certification had proved worthless once Ed's studio was seized and shuttered. The friends who'd once envied her lifestyle now crossed the street to avoid awkward conversations. But Marcus found that he felt no satisfaction in Kayla's downfall. She'd simply become irrelevant to his life, like a business competitor who'd been eliminated not through active warfare, but through their own poor decisions. The real test of Marcus's new life came when Alex turned 17 and college recruiting intensified. Several top universities were offering full scholarships for both athletics and academics, but the process required extensive family interviews. "Dad," Alex said one evening as they reviewed his college applications, "some of these schools want to meet with both parents." "What do we tell them about, Mom?" Marcus looked up from the financial aid forms he'd been completing. "We tell them the truth. Your mother lives separately and isn't involved in your education or athletic career. The schools will make their own judgments about what that means." "Will it hurt my chances?" "Alex, any school that would penalize you for your mother's choices isn't worth attending. You've earned these opportunities through your own merit. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The college interviews went better than either of them had expected. Coaches and admissions officers were impressed not just by Alex's athletic abilities and academic performance, but by his maturity and self-assurance. Several interviewers commented on the obvious strength of his relationship with Marcus and the way they communicated as equals rather than as a domineering parent and submissive child. Stanford offered Alex a full ride with the possibility of early admission to their graduate engineering program. MIT wanted him for their prestigious dual-degree program in mechanical engineering and business. Berkeley promised him a starting position on their Olympic development BMX team. But the offer that excited Alex most came from an unexpected source: the University of Washington's new extreme sports program, which was being funded by a partnership between the university and Apex Construction. "Dad," Alex said, holding the acceptance letter, "did you create this program just so I could attend locally?" Marcus smiled. "I created this program because the university approached me about funding athletic scholarships for kids from working-class backgrounds who excel at non-traditional sports. The fact that it benefits you is just good planning. But I could go anywhere. I don't need to stay close to home." "Alex, you could go anywhere and succeed brilliantly. But building something meaningful sometimes requires staying to nurture what you've started rather than chasing what looks flashier somewhere else." Alex nodded, understanding that this conversation was about more than college choices. "You're talking about building a legacy. I'm talking about understanding the difference between running towards something and running away from something. Your mother ran away from responsibility when it became difficult. You get to choose whether you run toward the life you want to build." That evening, Alex called each university to decline their offers except for UW. Then he asked Marcus if they could build a new BMX course on their property, one designed not just for Alex's training, but for the local kids who couldn't afford the equipment and coaching that Alex had access to. "We'll call it the Gaines Foundation Training Center," Alex suggested. "Free coaching and equipment for any kid who wants to learn." Marcus looked at his son and saw something that filled him with more pride than any business success ever had. He saw a young man who understood that true strength came not from what you could take from the world, but from what you could build for others. "Alex, that's exactly the kind of legacy worth building." As they sketched plans for the training center that night, Marcus realized that losing Kayla had taught him something invaluable about love. Real love, the kind between a parent and child, the kind between true partners, wasn't about possession or control. It was about building something together that would outlast both of you. Kayla had loved the idea of being Marcus's wife and Alex's mother, but she'd never loved the actual work of partnership and parenting. When that work became difficult, she'd abandoned it for the fantasy Ed Jackson had offered her. Marcus and Alex, meanwhile, had learned to love the work itself, the daily choice to support each other, the commitment to building something meaningful together, the understanding that strength came from reliability rather than intensity. They were building a foundation that could weather any storm because it was based on mutual respect rather than mutual need. Chapter 8. The Reckoning's End. 2 years after the divorce, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. Kayla was in the hospital following what her mother Muriel described as a nervous breakdown. She'd been found in her apartment by a welfare check after missing 3 days of work without calling in. "She keeps asking for you," Muriel said, her voice carrying none of its usual venom. "The doctors think she needs to make amends with you and Alex to start recovering properly." Marcus listened without interrupting, then asked a single question. What does Alex want to do? Alex, now 19 and thriving in his second year at UW, considered the request for all of 30 seconds. Dad, I'll go see her if you think it's the right thing to do. But I need you to know, I'm not going there to forgive her or to give her closure. I'm going there to confirm that the decision we made to move on without her was correct. They visited Kayla together on a gray Seattle afternoon. The psychiatric facility was clean and well-appointed, but institutional in a way that reminded Marcus of the Mexican hospital where Alex had nearly died. The irony wasn't lost on him. Kayla looked older than her 41 years, her face bearing the strain of 2 years spent facing the consequences of her choices. She'd lost weight and her hair was shorter, giving her a fragile appearance that might have generated sympathy if not for the calculating look in her eyes that activated the moment she saw Marcus and Alex enter her room. You came, she said, tears starting immediately. I wasn't sure you would. Alex wanted to see how you were doing. Marcus replied neutrally. Kayla focused on Alex with an intensity that made him visibly uncomfortable. Alex, I know I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I'm getting better. I'm learning about myself, about what went wrong in our family. What did you learn? Alex asked, his voice carefully polite. I learned that I was sick, that I had been suffering from depression and anxiety for years, and it made me vulnerable to manipulation. Ed took advantage of my mental illness, and I made decisions that weren't really me. Marcus felt a familiar coldness settle over him. Even in a psychiatric hospital, confronted with the full consequences of her actions, Kayla was still rewriting history to position herself as a victim rather than accepting responsibility for her choices. Mom, Alex said carefully, what about Mexico? What about abandoning me at the hospital? I was having a mental health crisis. I wasn't thinking clearly. The doctors here have explained that trauma can make people behave in ways that are completely out of character. Alex nodded thoughtfully. So, when you sent pictures of me unconscious to your boyfriend and made jokes about Dad's savior complex, that was because you were mentally ill. Yes, that wasn't the real me, Alex. The real me loves you more than anything. And when you moved Ed into our house while I was recovering from my injuries, that was also mental illness? Kayla's composure cracked slightly. I know how that looked, but, Mom, let me ask you a different question. In the 2 years since the divorce, how many times have you called me? The room fell silent. Marcus knew the answer because he'd monitored Alex's phone records to protect him from harassment. Kayla had called exactly 0 times. How many times have you sent a card, a letter, an email asking how I was doing? Alex continued. Again, silence. How many times have you asked Dad how I was doing when you talked to him about divorce paperwork or custody arrangements? Kayla's tears had stopped, replaced by a look of trapped desperation that Marcus recognized from their final argument in Mexico. Alex, you have to understand. Seeing you reminded me of my failures as a mother. I was protecting both of us by staying away until I could get healthy. Alex stood up slowly, and Marcus saw something in his son's posture that reminded him of himself in the moments before he destroyed Ed Jackson's life. Mom, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I came here today hoping to find out that you'd learned something about yourself, that you'd found some way to take responsibility for what you did to our family. Kayla nodded eagerly. I have. I've learned so much. No, you haven't. You've learned new ways to avoid responsibility. You've learned to blame mental illness for choices you made deliberately over a period of months. You've learned to call abandoning your child protecting him. Alex, please. I'm not finished. 2 years ago, you made a choice to prioritize your boyfriend over your dying son. That choice revealed something fundamental about who you are as a person. Today, you're making the same choice again by refusing to acknowledge what you did and instead making yourself the victim of circumstances beyond your control. Alex walked to the door, then turned back one final time. I forgive you for being a bad wife to Dad. I forgive you for being manipulated by a con artist. I even forgive you for abandoning me in Mexico. But I will never forgive you for refusing to own what you did. And I will never give you another opportunity to hurt our family again. With that, Alex left the room. Marcus remained for a moment longer, looking at the woman he'd once loved more than his own life. Kayla, you asked me once what real attention feels like. Real attention is what Alex just gave you. He listened to everything you said, considered it carefully, and made a thoughtful decision based on the evidence you presented. You had his complete attention, and you used it to prove that you haven't changed at all. Marcus, please. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can be better. I can be the mother Alex deserves. The mother Alex deserves is what Alex has become for himself. Someone who faces hard truths honestly, who takes responsibility for his choices, who builds rather than destroys. You had 18 years to teach him those things, and instead, he had to learn them in spite of you. Marcus walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Kayla, I hope you do get better. I hope you find peace and happiness, but you'll find them without us. In the car afterward, Alex was quiet for several miles before speaking. Dad, was I too harsh? Marcus considered the question seriously. Alex, what do you think would have happened if you'd been gentler? If you'd given her hope that forgiveness was possible, if she just said the right words? She would have spent the next 10 years trying to manipulate her way back into our lives instead of actually working on herself. And what would that cost you? Everything we've built together. She'd make me choose between you and her, between our life and her need for redemption. Marcus nodded. Some people can only learn from love, Alex, but some people can only learn from consequences. Your mother has had 2 years to demonstrate which kind of person she is. They drove home to their house where Alex's trophies lined the mantelpiece, where the Gaines Foundation Training Center was taking shape in the backyard, where they'd build a life based on mutual respect and shared purpose. That evening, as they worked together on Alex's graduate school applications, Marcus realized that Kayla's final gift to them had been confirming that they'd made the right choice in moving forward without her. They were stronger without her attempts to divide them. They were happier without her need to be the center of attention. They were more complete as a family of 2 people who chose each other every day than they'd ever been as a family of 3 where love was conditional and loyalty was negotiable. The revenge Marcus had planned against Kayla had proven unnecessary. She destroyed herself far more thoroughly than he ever could have, simply by being exactly who she'd always been underneath the facade. Chapter 9. The Legacy Lived. 5 years after Mexico, Marcus stood in the backyard of his Bellevue home watching Alex teach a group of 12-year-olds how to navigate their first BMX course. The Gaines Foundation Training Center had grown from a backyard project into a full-scale youth development program that served over 300 kids annually. Alex, now 21 with a bachelor's degree in engineering and a master's in business administration, ran the foundation with the same methodical precision Marcus brought to construction projects. But where Marcus built structures, Alex built character, teaching kids that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what was right despite being afraid. Mr. Gaines, one of the younger kids, a 10-year-old named Marcus, named after Marcus by parents who'd heard about the foundation's work, ran up with excitement radiating from every inch of his small frame. I made it over the jump. Did you see? Marcus smiled, remembering Alex at that age, fearless and eager to push boundaries. I saw, buddy. How did it feel? Scary and awesome at the same time. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel. The boy ran back to the course, where Alex was setting up a more challenging sequence of obstacles. Marcus watched his son work with these kids and saw something that filled him with profound satisfaction. Alex had inherited the best parts of both his parents without being damaged by their failures. From Marcus, Alex had learned strategic thinking, project management, and the patience required to build something meaningful over time. From Kayla, before she'd lost herself to bitterness and manipulation, Alex had inherited charisma, emotional intelligence, and the ability to connect with people from all walks of life. But most importantly, Alex had learned from watching both parents' mistakes. He'd seen how Marcus's single-minded focus on work had initially blinded him to problems in his marriage. He'd seen how Kayla's need for constant validation had made her vulnerable to manipulation. Alex had crafted his own approach to life that avoided both extremes. Dad, Alex called out during a break in training. The University of Washington called. They want to expand the Foundation's program to include engineering mentorship for high school students. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What kind of engineering mentorship? Teaching kids from working class backgrounds how to design and build their own extreme sports equipment, combining the physical training with technical education. That's brilliant. Whose idea was that? Alex grinned. Actually, it was Mom's. For a moment, Marcus thought he'd misheard. Kayla's, not my biological mom. My real mom, Jenny Wood. Marcus turned to see Jenny Wood walking across the yard with a folder full of proposals. At 34, Jenny was everything Kayla had pretended to be. Genuinely warm, naturally maternal, and completely comfortable with sharing rather than demanding attention. Jenny was a pediatric nurse practitioner who'd started volunteering at the foundation 2 years earlier. Her own children, twin girls aged 8, had gravitated toward both Marcus and Alex with the instinctive trust that kids display toward adults who actually prioritize children's well-being. What had started as a professional relationship had gradually evolved into something deeper. Jenny brought a perspective to their lives that neither Marcus nor Alex had realized they were missing. Not the artificial femininity that Kayla had weaponized, but the genuine nurturing energy that made everyone around her feel more capable of being their best selves. The proposal is incredible, Jenny said, handing Marcus the folder. We could teach kids how to design safer equipment, how to understand the physics behind their stunts, how to turn their passion for extreme sports into potential careers in engineering or product design. Marcus reviewed the proposal with the eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating business opportunities. This could work. More than work, this could change lives. That's the idea, Alex said. Jenny thinks we could pilot the program with 20 kids this summer. Jenny thinks, or Alex thinks? Marcus asked with a smile. We think, Alex replied, and Marcus noticed the way his son's hand found Jenny's automatically, the way they stood together like people who'd learned to function as a unit. That evening, after the day's training was complete and the kids had been picked up by grateful parents, Marcus found himself alone with Jenny while Alex cleaned equipment in the garage. Jenny, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What made you decide to get involved with our family? You know our history. You know what Alex went through with his biological mother. Jenny considered the question carefully, as she did most things. Marcus, I've worked with hundreds of families in pediatric medicine. I've seen every kind of parent, every kind of family dynamic. What I saw in you and Alex was something I'd rarely encountered. Two people who genuinely prioritized each other's growth and happiness over their own needs. That's a nice way to put it. It's also rare. Most parent-child relationships, even good ones, involve some element of control or obligation. You and Alex chose each other as people, not just as family members. When Alex talks about you, it's with the respect he'd show a mentor he'd selected, not just the duty he'd show a father he was stuck with. Marcus nodded, understanding what she meant. We've had to earn each other's respect. Exactly. And when I saw how Alex treated my daughters, not as obstacles to his relationship with me, but as additional people to care about, I realized that he'd learned something about love that took me years to figure out, which is that real love multiplies rather than divides. Kayla saw Alex as competition for your attention. Alex sees my daughters as opportunities to expand our family's capacity for happiness. Before Marcus could respond, Alex's voice called from the garage. Jenny, you have to see this. They walked over to find Alex holding a tablet, displaying news footage from a BMX competition in Portland. The winner was a 17-year-old girl named Sarah Chun who'd started training at the Gaines Foundation 3 years earlier as a shy kid with no money for proper equipment. She's using the bike we built for her, Alex said excitedly. And she just qualified for the X Games. Marcus watched the footage of Sarah celebrating her victory, surrounded by teammates who'd also trained at the foundation. In the background, he could see her parents, working-class immigrants who'd driven 8 hours to watch their daughter compete in a sport they didn't understand but supported because it made her happy. Alex, Marcus said quietly, this is bigger than anything I've ever built. Dad, you built the foundation that made this possible. No, Alex, I provided the resources. You built the program that turned resources into results. Jenny provided the vision that turned results into life changes. What we're looking at right now is what happens when people work together towards something bigger than themselves. That night, As Marcus reviewed expansion plans for the foundation and college recruitment letters for Alex, he realized that his life had become something he'd never expected when he was building his business empire. It had become a legacy that would outlast him. Kayla had been released from psychiatric care 2 years earlier and had moved to Portland, where she worked as a dental hygienist and attended support groups for people who'd been victims of manipulation. She'd never contacted Alex again, perhaps finally understanding that love sometimes meant leaving people alone to build better lives without you. Marcus had heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd found a measure of peace, if not happiness. She'd accepted responsibility for her choices and was working to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. It was more than he'd expected and less than Alex deserved, but it was enough to close that chapter of their lives permanently. Ed Jackson had disappeared entirely after losing the civil lawsuit brought by his victims. Last Marcus had heard, he was working construction jobs under an assumed name in Nevada. His career as a predator ended by the simple expedient of making his patterns public record. Neither Kayla nor Ed had ever understood the fundamental difference between punishment and consequences. Marcus had punished Ed by actively destroying his operation and exposing his crimes. But Kayla had simply faced the natural consequences of her choices, losing the respect of her son, the support of her community, and the life she'd taken for granted. The punishment had been swift and brutal. The consequences had been permanent and just. As Marcus turned off the lights in his home office, he looked out at the training center where tomorrow's session would bring another group of kids eager to learn that they were capable of more than they'd imagined. In 3 weeks, Alex would graduate from his master's program and officially take over day-to-day operations of the foundation. In 6 months, Alex and Jenny would be married in a ceremony that would include not just their immediate families, but dozens of kids whose lives had been changed by what they'd built together. Marcus Gaines had started his adult life believing that success meant accumulating resources and protecting what was his. He'd ended his marriage believing that strength meant punishing those who betrayed him. But now, watching his son prepare to build a family based on mutual respect rather than mutual need, Marcus understood that true success meant creating something that would improve the world long after you were gone. And true strength meant having the wisdom to know when consequences were sufficient and when mercy was possible. The boy who nearly died in a Mexican hospital had grown into a man who saved other children every day, not through dramatic rescues, but through the patient work of teaching them to save themselves. It was a better legacy than Marcus had ever dreamed of building, and it was only the beginning.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.